factor in the success of an organization is the motivation of the members of that organization. The more motivated people are, the more they'll help an organization move in the direction that that organization wants to go. We'll start the session by defining motivation, and then we'll look at why motivation is important for organizations. From there, we'll look in turn at different conceptualizations or frameworks that are tied to motivation. And these are frameworks that have been developed and used over the years. So we'll start by looking at a very classic framework, reward and punishment, and another classic, intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. And then we'll get into some that you might not be so familiar with, the next one being motivators and maintainers. The next framework we'll look at is one that uses the terms autonomy, mastery, and purpose. Then we'll take a look at another framework that you're probably familiar with, but we will remind you of it, and that is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So we'll look at this and how it relates to motivation. Then we'll look at how you can use these frameworks to analyze and to understand what is going on in your organization in terms of motivation. And finally, we'll wrap up with the chance for you to develop a personal action plan to apply what you've learned in this session to either your personal or your professional context or the organization in which you work. There are obviously many different ways to define motivation because you can look at it from a number of different angles. But all of the definitions of motivation involve the following concepts. So motivation is something, so some either tangible thing or intangible thing that causes a person to expend energy. So the person gets up and does something and uses energy in order to move forward or move towards a specific goal. So all of the definitions of motivation include these components. It's something that causes someone to expend energy in order to move forward or move towards a specific goal. All of the definitions of motivation also indicate that motivation is something that is internal to an individual. So it's very individualized and it's internal to that person. So this is really important because different individuals might be motivated by different things. So motivation happens on a very individual basis. And it's also internal, and that's important to remember because we often think that we can actually motivate somebody. We can do something to move them forward, but we can't. The motivation comes inside. We can change things in the environment or change things around a person in order to kind of light the fire of motivation within that person, but the actual motivation comes from inside the person. The idea or the will or the want or the need to move forward comes from inside somebody. So these are the key points that we need to keep in mind when we're thinking about this concept of motivation. One other way to look at motivation, just to round out this definition, is to think that individuals are motivated because an outcome, so an outcome or the end point of something either meets a need or meets a want or is very, very interesting to that individual. And this then serves as the incentive for that individual to move forward or to take action. So you can think of motivation as helping an individual move towards an outcome that that individual simply thinks is valuable or thinks is a good outcome to have. I stated in the introduction to this session that motivation is a key factor in organizational success. And there's a very simple reason for this. And the reason lies in a term called organizational morale. Organizational morale is the attitude that members of the organization have towards the work they do, the environment they're working in, and the organization as a whole. Research has clearly established a link between motivation, so the motivation of the participants in the organization, and organizational morale. And then organizational morale in turn leads to organizational success. So motivation is, as I stated a number of times already, really key to organizational success through this concept of organizational morale. So we need to understand motivation in order to help our organizations and help ourselves be successful. Over the years, researchers and practitioners and academics have developed quite a few different frameworks for motivation. And these frameworks allow us to, first of all, understand how motivation works in the real world with real people, and it also helps us tweak or drive individual motivation of the people around us in our organization. So from here on in, we're going to take a look at some of the most important of these frameworks. So these are the frameworks that are most commonly known and also most commonly used when it comes to overall organizational success and the tie with motivation. Perhaps the most enduring and certainly the most well-known framework for motivation is a classic one of reward and punishment. This has been around for years and years, and we still use it. So a reward is something positive that happens in response to an outcome or a behavior. So you study hard and you do well on the test and you get an A, and that's your reward. Or you get an A, and if you're a student, your parents give you an extra bonus in your allowance or something like that. So a reward is a positive thing that happens in response to something that a person does. The opposite side, obviously, is a punishment. And a punishment is something negative that happens in response to a negative or negatively perceived behavior or outcome. So this is the classic way to think about motivating people. We can motivate them by giving them rewards when they do something good and punishments when they do something bad. You might think that we don't use reward and punishment very much anymore because you might think, oh, this is an outdated way to motivate people. But trust me, reward and punishment is still here, and it's used very, very frequently by a lot of different organizations. So if you even take a look at your own organization, you'll see reward and punishment in action. So you get rewards for good performance in your job by getting a promotion, for example, or you might get a bonus if you meet certain desired outcomes or certain performance metrics in your organization. Your team, if your team meets a performance goal, you might get a retreat somewhere, or you might have something as simple as a Friday afternoon celebration for what you've accomplished in the week. So there's a lot of reward stuff happening in companies. Oh, I forgot a couple of other ones. Many organizations have awards. So, for a number of years of service or top performing salesperson or top performing person in a team. So many companies and organizations use awards as a type of reward system to motivate employees or members of the organization. Similarly, organizations also use punishments in order to not have individuals behave in a certain way. So the classic punishment in an employment situation, for example, would be to get fired. So if you break the company rules or do something that you're simply not supposed to do, you could end up losing your job. And that's a punishment. If it's not a job context, but just an organizational context, the ultimate punishment would be to be expelled from the organization. So if you break the organization's rules or policies, they might reserve the right to say, okay, you can't belong to our organization anymore. So this is a punishment. It keeps people not doing the negative behaviors that the company doesn't want to see. Rewards and punishments, even though they've been around for a long time, and they are certainly very effective in certain basic situations, they only get us so far as an organization in terms of getting people to do what we need them to do in order for our organization to be successful. So rewards and punishments are there in pretty much every organization, but we need to go beyond that in order to further kind of refine our approach to getting individuals motivated. Before we move on to look at some of these other motivational frameworks, take a few minutes just to take a look at your organization. What are the rewards that are in place in that organization, and what types of behaviors actually get rewarded? And then what are the punishments that are in place in your organization, and what are the behaviors or the outcomes that actually get those punishments administered by the organization? So take a few minutes and apply this particular framework to your organization and start to see how this basic framework is used. And then move on, and we'll move on to the next motivation framework. framework is one that you might also be familiar with. And this is a framework of extrinsic motivation and intrinsic motivation. And there are some similarities with this between this framework and the rewards and punishments, as you'll see, but there are a few differences. So extrinsic motivation is something external to an individual that then prompts that individual to take action. So the individual is still responsible for deciding, okay, I'm going to do something or I'm not going to do something, but the thing they're responding to is something outside of themselves. So classic extrinsic motivators would be things like salaries, benefits, prizes, awards, anything like that, that from the outside then gets the person thinking, okay, I really want to do this. I want that prize, or I want that award, or I want that salary increase. So that's extrinsic motivation. Intrinsic motivation, on the other hand, is something from within the individual that drives that individual to do something or to take action. So it comes from inside the person rather than outside the person. So here are some examples of intrinsic motivators. So someone might get driven simply because they like to have a sense of accomplishment if they do something. A person might want to gain the respect of his or her colleagues. A person might simply enjoy interacting with other people or being part of a really good team. So these are all examples of intrinsic motivators that could be present within an individual to motivate him or her to take action. You may have noticed that the extrinsic motivators seem fairly familiar, and they should. The extrinsic motivators such as salary increases, awards, and prizes and bonuses, they're very similar, or they are exactly the same as the rewards part of the previous framework of rewards and punishments. What's new with this framework, however, is intrinsic motivation. So this idea of extrinsic and intrinsic motivation really acknowledges that a lot of what drives an individual actually resides within that individual rather than external to that individual. And so often these intrinsic motivators are just as powerful or more powerful than the extrinsic motivators. So that's why this framework is really important for us to understand. It gives us that intrinsic motivation piece that we were missing in the previous framework. Take a few minutes to reflect on what's going on in your organization with respect to extrinsic motivation and intrinsic motivation. So what are the external motivators that your organization has in place to tap into the extrinsic motivation of the members of that organization? And then also take a look at your colleagues and maybe even interview them or talk to them. What are the intrinsic motivators of the people in your organization? So analyze your own organization using this framework. Before we move on to the next framework for motivation, there's a really interesting twist to extrinsic and intrinsic motivation that research has recently uncovered. And this is the understanding or the idea that individuals are motivated up to a certain point by extrinsic motivators. So we're motivated up to a point by salary, bonuses, and prizes, and so on. But beyond that point, that's where the intrinsic kicks in. So for example, if I have in my mind that I'm worth X amount of dollars in terms of salary, I'm going to be extrinsically motivated up to that point by whatever salary I get. But once I'm comfortable that I'm earning enough money and the salary's where I think it should be, and I don't feel that I'm economically threatened, then that's when the intrinsic motivators kick in. So up to a point, we can motivate people extrinsically by something like salary, but once they reach their comfort level and they feel confident that they're economically secure, then we have to tap into their intrinsic motivation. So this is just an interesting way to look at extrinsic and intrinsic in terms of motivating people. The idea that extrinsic motivators can take us to a certain point of motivation and then intrinsic motivators take over is reflected in the next motivation framework that we'll look at. And this is a framework that uses two terms. maintainers and motivators. Maintainers are the minimum that we need to have in order to do the minimum tasks that are required of us. So it could be the minimum salary we need, the minimum bonus we need, the minimum number of working hours that we need. So this is the minimum that's going to keep us motivated and engaged in order to do the minimum that's required of us. So these are maintainers. Motivators, on the other hand, take over once those maintainers have been met. So motivators speak to us at an inner level and a very individual level, and these are what drive us to go above and beyond what is required in order to satisfy the maintainers. So motivators are fairly similar to intrinsic motivation, but it's just reframed a little bit so that we can really focus on the fact that once we've got this baseline of comfort and safety, then we've got these other factors that kick in, our motivators, and these speak to us very individually in an inner way that to drive us to do the next level of action or to achieve the next level of performance. Here are some examples of motivators, so things that satisfy us at an individual level and drive us to a higher level of performance beyond that which is required for the maintainers. So examples of motivators might be a need to feel a sense of achievement, a need to feel like we're continually learning, and a need for self-development. We might have a need for the respect of others, or we might have a need to feel like we belong somewhere. So these are motivators. Take a few minutes to analyze your organization and some of the individuals in your organization and see if you can identify what the maintainers are and what the motivators are. Some of these may be similar to your extrinsic and intrinsic motivators, but we're just once again reframing them a little bit differently to really establish in our minds that maintainers are the minimum and then motivators really speak to us inside as individuals. So analyze your organization. What do you think the maintainers are and what do you think the motivators are? The next framework for motivation is called Autonomy, Mastery, and Purpose. This framework comes to us from an expert on motivation, Daniel H. Pink. If you get the chance, I really recommend that you read his book, and it's called Drive, so D-R-I-V-E. If you also search under the word, using the word Drive and Daniel H. Pink on either YouTube or Google, you'll pull up some really good talks that he's given on this information, autonomy, mastery, and purpose. So take a few minutes if you want and see if you can find those talks by Daniel H. Pink, because he certainly knows this material better than I do and he's a great speaker. But I'll just take you through an overview so that you get a sense of what this framework is. So let's take a look at autonomy, mastery, and purpose. So the idea with this framework of autonomy, mastery, and purpose is that we are motivated by each of these three pieces. And one piece may have more significance to us at a certain point than another, but all three of these pieces are what drive us in today's complex society to take action or to strive to accomplish something. So the first one is autonomy. You all know what autonomy means. Autonomy means independence or being able to function independently. So the first factor that motivates us in today's society is this desire to be autonomous or this desire to be independent. So we're always seeking to increase our capabilities, our abilities and our skills and things like that so that we can be autonomous. We can function independently as an individual. I just want to expand a little bit more on this idea of autonomy. So how we can use autonomy to motivate people in an organization is not only to allow them to develop the skills and abilities to be autonomous, but we also want to be able to give them the opportunity to demonstrate that they are autonomous or that they can deal with autonomy. So you may have heard the term macro-management. We contrast two management styles, a macro-management style and a micro-management style. So a macro-management style is when someone kind of steps back and allows his or her employees to just try doing the work themselves, and that the person is there as a consultant and a quality control person, but the people doing the task really are free to work through it and figure it out themselves. The opposite of that, of course, is micromanagement, where the manager is kind of looking over everyone's shoulders and monitoring every single step of the process and jumping in when even the smallest thing goes wrong. So when we want to tap into the autonomy part of individual motivation, we do want to take that macro management perspective or approach. We want to step back and allow people to try things out, make mistakes, and give them the opportunity to fix their mistakes. So not only does autonomy mean that we want to allow people to develop the skills and abilities to be autonomous, but we also want to give them the opportunities to try that out, to be autonomous and see how they do. So there are those two sides to this piece, autonomy, when it comes to motivation. The next component of this framework is mastery. Mastery simply means that one of the things that drives us is a need or a want to be skilled at something and to be respected for being skilled at something. So we all strive to learn something and to be considered good at something. And so this is the concept of mastery. So what we need to do at an organizational level is, first of all, give people the opportunity to develop their mastery. So this means continual professional development, fostering a learning environment in the workplace, and just giving people continuous opportunities to learn and develop mastery. And then on the other side of it, we want to give people in the organization the opportunity to demonstrate that they have mastery. So if they're very good at something, for example, in a project, we want to give them the lead in whatever it is they're good at with respect to that project. So anytime we have the opportunity to put people front and center because they've got that mastery, that's a good thing, because that motivates them and it says to them, look, I know you have mastery at this particular skill or this particular task, and I'm going to use that in my organization. The third piece of this framework is purpose. Purpose is simply the reason that we have for doing something. The purpose that motivates us could be something as simple as, I want to buy a house, or I want to buy a new car. Or it could be, I want to help people, so I like helping people. That's my purpose. Or my purpose could be, I want to create something. I want to create a piece of artwork, or I want to create an organization. So the purpose is that third piece in the motivation concept, or this motivation framework that Daniel Pink talks about. Take a few minutes to look at your organization from the perspective of this framework: autonomy, mastery, and purpose. So look for opportunities that people or members of the organization are given to develop their autonomy and also use their autonomy or function autonomously. Take a look at situations in which individuals in the organization are given the opportunity to learn and develop themselves in order to have mastery. And also look for ways in which individuals in the organization are given the opportunity to demonstrate that they have mastery. And finally, look at the different purposes that people in the organization have for doing what they do. The final framework that we're going to look at is one that you will be familiar with if you've studied psychology. This is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Maslow's hierarchy of needs has 5 levels that we need to work through in order to feel kind of fulfilled and fully motivated as human beings. The strength of this particular framework is it has the idea that we have to move through a progression. So we can't move up to that full sense of being fully human until we've got each of these layers or each of these levels in the hierarchy satisfied. And so when it comes to an organizational perspective, we need to look at the individuals in our organization and figure out where they are in the hierarchy and how we can help them push higher and higher up till they feel that sense of being fully human and fully motivated. The first layer of Maslow's hierarchy of needs is a set of physiological needs that we all have as human beings. So every human being needs food, water, shelter, and warmth. If these are not in place, as human beings, it doesn't matter who we are, we're not looking any further. So those are the core things that we need in order to exist as human beings. So those are our physiological needs. Once we've got our physiological needs met, the next layer up in Maslow's hierarchy is safety needs. So once again, as human beings, we need to feel safe. Okay? We need to feel secure. We need to feel a sense of freedom from fear. We need to know that, okay, if we step outside of our door, we're going to be safe, or even if we're inside our homes, we're going to be safe. So safety needs is the next level up in Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Now, you might think that in developed countries and more complex societies, these two bottom layers of Maslow's hierarchy of needs are not relevant. They actually are, because if you look around, there are many, many people, even in developed countries, that don't have these two basic levels of Maslow's hierarchy of needs met. So in your organization, this is your starting point. You need to make sure that everyone in your organization has these two layers met, the physiological needs and the safety needs. Because if they're not met, you can't take these people any further. The next level up in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, so we're at level 3 now, is the belongingness level. So at this level, human beings, and once again, we're all the same, we need a sense of belonging and we need love. And we get this from our friends, from our partners, our spouses, our lovers, our family members. All the significant others or the significant people in our lives provide us with this sense of belonging and this sense of being loved. How does this relate to an organization? Obviously, you're not going to have everybody in your organization married to everyone else, but what you're going to have is you want to create a sense that people are a part of something. So people belong to your organization, it's a supportive organization, and they care about, your organization cares about everyone who is a part of this organization. So belongingness does actually factor in when we're looking at motivation as an organization. We want to give the people who are a part of our organization a sense of belonging. Level 4 of Maslow's hierarchy of needs is self-esteem. At this level, we're looking to have self-respect, to have a sense of achievement, to have mastery, and just to be able to look ourselves in the eye and appreciate who we are and have other people look at us and respect us. So self-esteem is the next level. And you'll see we're starting to get into the more intangible parts of this hierarchy. So physiological needs and safety needs, those are pretty tangible. But when we get to self-esteem, we're really looking inside the individual. And as organizations, what we can do here at the self-esteem level is we can provide our employees or the members of our organization with opportunities to both develop mastery and demonstrate mastery. So this ties in with Daniel Pink's mastery concept as well. So organizationally, we can really help our members develop self-esteem by giving them opportunities to learn, by giving them opportunities to achieve different things and demonstrate that they're good at different things. So self-esteem is something that we can really work with at the organizational level. The fifth and final level of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, so at the very top of the pyramid, is self-actualization. Self-actualization simply means that we feel we are the person we were meant to be. So we feel a very strong sense of fulfillment, and we feel a very strong inner individualized identity. We tap into our creativity. We feel that all of our abilities are being used to their utmost. So it's a sense of wholeness and a sense of satisfaction that, hey, this is who I'm meant to be, and I am that person. How does this relate to organizations? Once again, organizations can help individuals get up to this self-actualization level by giving them opportunities to fulfill what it is they want to fulfill and giving them opportunities to develop those inner identities so they can really feel that they are the person they were meant to be. Maslow's hierarchy of needs is really useful for us to understand what happens to individuals when something traumatic happens in their lives. So, for example, the loss of a job or the loss of a close family member. These, if you look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you can kind of pick out the level at which this traumatic event has impacted the individual. And when you pull that level out, everything above it basically just crumbles. So for example, when somebody loses his or her job and no longer has the money, for example, to pay a mortgage or to pay rent, both their physiological needs and their safety needs are impacted. And so this kind of pulls the rug out from underneath them, and any self-esteem, any belongingness, or any self-actualization that this individual might have had, it's gone, because that base of Maslow's hierarchy of needs is gone as well. So you can look at individuals in the organization and you can actually help them when different events impact them at different levels of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Another example would be the loss of a friend or a spouse or a partner. That really impacts people at the belongingness and love level. And you take that out, and then the self-esteem level and the self-actualization level are impacted. So this is why this hierarchical idea really helps us understand the impact of different events on individuals. I just talked about the impact of negative events on individuals as interpreted through Maslow's hierarchy of needs. But we can look at the other side of the coin, and we can look at the powerful impact that positive things with respect to Maslow's hierarchy of needs can have on an individual. So if an individual is struggling, and maybe it's a case of they're living in an unsafe neighborhood, well, if we can help them get to a safe neighborhood, then we've cleared up that level, that safety needs level of Maslow's hierarchy of needs for them, and then they can move to the next level. So it really helps us identify how we can positively impact the individuals in our organization. At the organizational level, if we can provide our employees or the members of our organization with positive experiences, for example, a sense of belonging, then we can really help them firm up that level of Maslow's hierarchy of needs for themselves. So use the hierarchy of needs in order to identify, first of all, where events have negatively impacted an individual in the organization, but also to identify how you as someone in this organization can positively impact and positively motivate the other individuals in that organization. So take a few minutes to take a look at your organization with respect to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So first of all, does your organization do anything at those two base levels of the hierarchy? Does your organization ensure that everyone's physiological needs are met and that their safety needs are met? And then moving up, what does your organization do in order to give members of the organization a sense of belonging? How do you help members build their self-esteem? And how do you help members move towards self-actualization? So analyze your own organization with respect to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. How do these motivation frameworks apply to your organization? You may recall that after introducing and explaining each motivation framework, I asked you to reflect upon and analyze your organization. What I'd like you to do is to go back and pull together your notes from each of those analyses and put them together so that you can get a better understanding of what's happening in your organization with respect to motivation. So go back to rewards and punishments. What's happening in your organization with respect to rewards that you have and punishments that you have? What's happening in your organization with respect to extrinsic and intrinsic motivation? What's happening in your organization with respect to maintainers and motivators? And so on. Collect all of your notes in one place and then start to consolidate them to give yourself a very clear picture of what's happening in your organization with respect to motivation. And I have one last job for you. What I'd like you to do is take a look at this analysis that you've done, applying these frameworks to your organization, and I'd like you to pick out the top 3 priorities. So when you look at your organization, what are the priorities that really jump out at you? And just pick 3. And then I'd like you to put these priorities into an action plan. So priority number 1, 2, and 3. And your action plan should use SMART goals. If you've ever done any goal or objective writing, you'll know that SMART goals are specific, they're measurable, they're achievable, they're relevant, and they have some type of time framework associated with them. So take a look at what needs to be done in your organization to improve the motivation, and make yourself a 3-point action plan, so 3 priorities, and make sure that you have SMART goals associated with each of those priorities. This will give you a clear direction to move in order to apply what you've learned in this session to improve the motivation in your organization.